Hello, Ramsay Burt here. This is my second video about Pola Nirenska. In the first, I introduced her and said why I think she's interesting, although largely missing from most modern dance history books. In this video, I'm going to give an overview of her life and career. Nirenska was born in Warsaw in 1910. Her father was a relatively well-off Polish Jewish businessman, a necktie manufacturer. In her teens, she attended Janina Miasinska School, where she learnt Jacques Dalcroze's rhythmic and plastic exercises. And at the age of 17, in 1929, she began to train full-time as a professional modern dancer at Mary Wigman School in Dresden. Graduating in 1932, Wigman invited her to join the company that she was assembling for an American tour of her group piece Der Weg. At the end of the tour in 1933, when they returned to Germany, Hitler's NSPAD had come to power, and Wigman had to release all of the Jewish dancers from her company. So Nirenska went back to Warsaw, where she began to teach at Janina Miasinska School, where she'd been a pupil in her teens. In 1933, the second international choreographic competition, organised by Rolf de Marais, was held in Warsaw, and Nirenska entered a solo which did reasonably well. In 1934, the third international choreographic competition was held in Vienna. And again, Nirenska entered and won first prize for a solo, Cry, as well as winning a prize for choreography for a group based on folk dance with students from Miasinska's school. Nirenska then got a scholarship from the Polish government that allowed her to train at the Hellerau Laxenberg School, which was Jacques Dalcroze's school, with the artistic director Rosalia Schladek. And Schladek seems to have helped her get a booking to present a matinee of her solos in March 1935. Theatre in der Josefstadt in Vienna, and this was quite a progressive theatre whose artistic director was Max Reinhardt. After the performance, she was approached by Angiola Sartorio, who's a very interesting Italian Jewish modern dance choreographer who trained in Laban's work in Germany and had also collaborated with Reinhardt on a production in Florence. And Sartorio had a company in Florence that choreographed for opera productions at the Opera House and also school. And Nirenska went to Florence, danced in one of the opera productions and taught in the school. And around this time, she also seems to have been invited to Rome by Teo Fasulo and either performed in Rome or taught in his school, or perhaps both. In 1936, in January, Nirenska was back in Vienna. In the summer, we know that from newspaper cuttings that she was living in London. She may have gone back to visit her family in Warsaw in between. She was moving to London because of rising anti-Semitism in continental Europe. She started getting whatever work she could. She danced as a kind of speciality act in a couple of very upper-class balls. She got a scholarship to attend the Jos Leder School of Dance at Dartington College. She attended from September to December in '36. She didn't come back the following term. in 1937 she started dancing in revues, and also performing on live broadcasts, live television broadcasts for the BBC, their pioneering television station at Alexandra Palace in London. By 1939 she was beginning to be reasonably established, trying to promote her modern dance, but mostly supporting herself through more popular dancing. When war broke out, she joined an organisation called ENSA, Entertainment National Service Association, who provided live entertainment for the armed services. And she performed either in shows for troops or in galas raising money for war charities. She also made a connection with the Polish Army choir. Polish Army, after the fall of Poland, had fought in France and then evacuated to Britain and were based in lowland Scotland. So she spent some time in Scotland dancing with the choir. And there is a little bit of film of her dancing to a folk song with the choir singing it. 1946, she managed to establish herself more as a modern dance artist. Towards the end of the war, dancing with Polish classical musicians in a mixed bill. They performed pieces of music, and then she danced some of her solos. And with the support of the newly formed Arts Council of Great Britain, in 1946 and 47, Nirenska toured her recital of modern dance around the UK. Also in 1947, she took presumably the same programme to Palestine, where she danced for British troops based there. Dancing in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And while she was there, she was able to reunite with her mother and father and brother, who had managed to leave Warsaw and emigrate to Palestine in 1939, getting out just in time. In 1948, she went to the Modern Dance Summer School in Zurich, where she was able to meet up again with Mary Wigman. Wigman wrote her letters encouraging her to come. But for the rest of the time she was based in London, doing the odd performance and still appearing on television. But in late summer she boarded a ship, crossed the Atlantic and emigrated to New York, where she arrived with $30 and 2 letters of introduction, one to the Boston Conservatory and the other to Ted Shawn at Jacob's Pillow. And she prepared for a solo performance at Boston Conservatory in February, and then shared a bill with one other choreographer at Jacob's Pillow in June. The rest of the time she supported herself by washing dishes in an Italian restaurant and then eating whatever was left over when the restaurant closed, and with the money taking as many different modern dance classes as she could in New York. She'd been, while in London, seemed to have been more or less cut off from the modern dance world, and here was a chance to catch up and discover what was happening on this side of the Atlantic. The one modern dance artist in the States who she seemed to make the strongest connection with at the time was Doris Humphrey, and Humphrey invited her to be a choreographic assistant at the American Dance Festival at Connecticut College in New London. And 3 years running she assisted Humphrey. She also made her own choreography, I think, at the festival, which she showed to Humphrey and got doubtless very valuable feedback from her. Humphrey also advised her that she was probably going to find it very, very difficult to establish herself in New York because there were already so many well-known American modern dancers living and working there. And so when Nirenska was invited by Evelyn de la Tour to come to Washington and teach in her school, she moved to Washington, where she lived for the rest of her life. By 1955-56, with advanced students from de la Tour's school, she founded the Pola Nirenska Dance Company, creating group pieces and still occasionally appearing on stage dancing with them. By 1959-60, she was well enough established to start her own school in a studio at the back of the house she was now living in Washington. Around this time, she met Jan Karski. Karski was was a hero of the Polish resistance, who was the first person to bring news of the Holocaust to the French and British and American governments. While in Warsaw, he'd been smuggled by a member of the Jewish resistance into the ghetto, and was able to see the horrendous conditions that the Nazis had imposed there, and also disguised as a concentration camp guard, had managed to get into a concentration camp where he was violently sick and got out, smuggled across the frontier, got to London, talked to Anthony Eden, but didn't get to meet Churchill. Also met de Gaulle, and then travelled to Washington, where he met Roosevelt and other members of the American government. He had apparently seen Nirenska dancing in London, though they'd not met at the time. But he was living in Washington, D.C., teaching at Georgetown University. And in 1965, Nirenska converted to Catholicism, and they got married. In 68 or 69, Nirenska, by now nearly 60, closed her school and retired, and took up photography. But the next few years were not very happy ones for her, and she later said that she tried to commit suicide every other year. She suffered a lot of mental health problems and was given the ghastly electroconvulsive therapy. In 1977, she somehow met Liz Lerman, who had started the very interesting dance exchange project in Washington. And Lerman encouraged her to come back from retirement, and introduced her to a company of dancers based at the Dance Exchange, who she could work with. And she initially revived some of her pieces from the 50s and 60s, and then started making new work, and showing annual concerts of her work in Washington. Liz Lerman herself learns one of Nirenska's solos, which she dances at one of Nirenska's concerts. Karski by now had been rediscovered and become something of an international celebrity because of his role trying to make people aware of the Holocaust. The first person to bring news of the Holocaust to the Western Allied governments. And in 1982, Karski and Nirenska were invited to visit Israel as guests of the Israeli government. Nirenska's parents had died, but she was able to visit their grave. And around this time, Nirenska started to make 4 pieces, so-called tetralogy, on the theme of the Holocaust, which she made with great difficulty because of increasing sort of mental health incidents. She suffered a massive breakdown on the eve of their premiere in 1989, and so the premiere was cancelled, and then Rima Farber, who was the kind of lead dancer in Nirenska's company, rehearsed the pieces, and then with Nirenska's approval, they were finally performed in 1990 on Nirenska's 80th birthday, and were extremely well received. Lots of really good reviews of the pieces. Karski and Nirenska moved out of their house in Washington DC into a high-rise apartment where Nirenska had a garden on the balcony, and in 1992 she fell off the balcony. Karski said it was an accident, she was watering the plants, but everybody else seemed to believe that it was suicide. So, as I've just said, during her career, Nirenska connected with three important figures: Wigman, Humphrey and Lerman. Her relations with Wigman seem to have been more than just pupil and teacher. Wigman's affectionate letters to Liebe Polekin continued until the mid-1950s. But on tour in 1932 and 33, Nirenska was part of a group around one of the strongest solo dancers of the first half of the 20th century, and following this, Nirenska developed her own career as a solo dance artist, following in Wigman's footsteps. By 1949, I guess that Nirenska felt she'd achieved as much as she could in England, and so moved to New York. In the US, she began to create choreography with a group. Humphrey, who she also seems to have made a good connection with, was one of the great exponents of group choreography, not for a corps ballet of unison dancers, but for an ensemble of individuals. Lerman seems key to Nirenska coming out of retirement. Lerman, as I've said, danced a solo by Nirenska around the time that she was making her own 1981 piece, The Good Jew, which includes a sequence about the Holocaust. It's an example of what Sally Baines called the postmodern return of content, and this is the context in which Nirenska's work was going through a revival of interest. So, to sum up, Nirenska seems to have created work that was well received by both audiences and critics in each place and each time where she was living and working. I'm going to make another video that looks at a wartime propaganda film of Nirenska dancing to a Polish folk song performed by the Polish Army Choir, which I mentioned just now. And I'll put a link in the notes below to a list of my sources. If you're interested, look out for the next video, and meanwhile, thank you for watching.